easiest way to get into the
Wellness and welcome. This is Josh Dippold of IntegratingPresence.com. Today I'm back with Randy Green for a part 2 in this little, maybe 2-part series. We'll see. The first part was who are the quote-unquote aliens? And we kind of alluded at the end of the last one. These next follow-up questions are, why are they here and what do they want? Before we get into that, if anybody has any requests for topics of what you would like Randy and I to mention or talk about, you can put them in the comments or write in, and we may consider them. It would be interesting to get maybe feedback to see what people are interested in as far as topics go. So right into it now. Maybe a little recap of the first one, or maybe not, but just go right into the big questions of why are they here? What do they want?
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? And in a way, I could allude to my older material, my first book, The Source of Humanity. There I touched ground with what we could call the old world order races that were part of the colonization, why they were here, what their programs were, what they were doing here. And in my 6 series perception logs, I talk about how I recall the timeline event and how this reality was created into a restoration program and how it will kind of, as I also talked about the quarantine due to the breakdown of genetics. But these are all, when we look at in the big scheme of things, they're...
And the programs under Modern History, the book Modern History you wrote too, yeah.
Yes, so there are also the military project program. So there's so many things going on here. So the big question, the umbrella question is, what are they doing here? It's like asking, what is humanity doing on this planet? So there are many different programs, many different options to look into, many different answers. And that's not what people want to hear. They want to hear, oh, they're here because of this or that, or, which I find more interesting to work with as well, not excluding everything else, but I think the first important notion to be worked with here is that people have, or not all, some have, we can't say everybody has. Again, let's try to put it into little tiers or little streaks of information and say, well, in the time I've been working with this and years ago in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, especially in the 2000s, where I began picking up on researchers, UFO researchers, looking into their material, going back to the 80s and the way that they addressed this, most of them, not all of them, but most of them were talking about, there were the prominent ones, the Reptoids, the Greys, and then we have Galactic Federation, and we had all these other different groups that were part of the Great White Brotherhood. So we have many different angles to go down and say, well, who are the aliens, which we talked about in the last podcast, and not giving any decisive answer there. But it kind of goes with these different groups are here for different purposes. And we have, when we talk about Sitchin, that's how we pronounce it right in English.
Zechariah Sitchin, I think.
Yes, thank you. And we have Eric von Däniken, and we have the old writers that wrote about the gods being here already, that the aliens were the gods back in the ancient days. And that's my stand as well. The Greys and some of the newer groups that when we talk about in America, the alien abduction groups that came in the 50s, flew over Washington in 1952. For me, that's a whole new group that's come in, and their agenda is completely different. And they don't belong here, and they are actually operating here on what I call illegal contracts made with the enhanced humans. So for me, they're not allowed to be here at all. And then you can ask, well, are the Dracos or the Reptoids, were they allowed to be here? And in my understanding of things, they came here as part of the colonization, so they took it by force. So when we talk about what do they want here, it's instead of seeing them as something new, we should see it in a historical context. That's kind of where I want to put it. And that once we begin to see them as being present, not as our guardians or custodians, which we also heard, I think, James Sparks talk about the groups that he was dragged into by his not his free will. And that they presented themselves to be, we have always been here, we're here to take care of the planet, and we have got some of the hybrid projects where the Greys are literally bombarding the hybrid kids with the understanding that they are part of a mission to preserve the planet, and that they have been there all along, and they are the new groups, the Ishishani or whatever the new groups that will lead into the future of hybrid humanities, which in my opinion is also completely legal, but they are creating a story around it to make it legal, to make it acceptable, like we're seeing with a lot of other stuff that's going on our planet.
I guess some of the other possibilities would be, tourism, like what it's like to be here, or explorers finding the place. I guess imagine that, I'm your space brother kind of thing. I'm here to help you out, kumbaya, and we'll all join hands and we'll work this out together, which, and the other ones of these races that trade genetics and information, the warring people that are in war. So there's kind of like parallels to our society, political reasons, right? Bargaining chips, people stabbing each other in the back, these different groups making alliances, these type of things. There could also be experimentation, lots of experimentation. There can be nihilists maybe that just want to come in and blow everything up, and there can be people that just want to preserve it so it'll last forever and ever. So just about any kind of, it seems like just about any kind of things that humans are into here, it could also be like a different level or different, there's similarities or what I would imagine. I know we talked about this show that was on the History Channel in the States a while back called Ancient Aliens, and I haven't watched it. I think they covered some of these things, but overall, I think amongst all these different possibilities and agendas, it's important to know that it's just not one overarching thing or one overarching reason, that there's a lot of different boxes and groups and things involved and things to consider.
Yeah. I think when we go into this, because what would be the point of talking about this? Because there have been so many good voices out there already. So what would be if we look at when we work with information should lead to some kind of progression of knowledge, some kind of expansion of knowledge. So we get a more broad view of why we're here, the existential level of what it means to be human, or just go into the idea as our planet as a school. It doesn't matter really which type of spirituality or ideology or whatever we look into. When we work with information, it should lead to some kind of progression. It should lead to some kind of, not a rigid conceptualization of saying, oh, this is what I know, and then I cling on to it, and this is my comfort zone, this is my ideology, this is my political stand on this, and I fight to my last breath to preserve what I have made of ideas. But should opening up so we play with more different angles on the topics we want to investigate. And that goes with when we talk about the groups that are here, looking at it from many different angles. And for me as a psychotherapist, the most important thing always comes down to, okay, what is a psychological expansion possibility of working with the notion of aliens actually being here, instead of denying it and going in and pushing away so it's not there, or saying it just belongs to the past, or they're just here temporarily, they will leave again, and then, or they're not here at all, or whatever people are coming up with.
Or the denial that, considering that there's maybe also the possibility that they're not here, that there's, that this might be a mental construction or a thing that we had to invent, like some people say they invented God because there's a necessity to do so. But even that, so yeah, all these things, I don't subscribe to any of them. Like you say, taking that all as a whole, yes, what is the importance of considering all that and something else entirely? Yeah. Yes.
So with the idea of that is something that we have invented. I know Carl Gustav Jung in the 1950s said it was a kind of synchronicity of the zeitgeist of people envisioning this part of the collective consciousness, and by that we always manifested the craft in the sky. And I have seen a craft in the sky in Australia, and I've dang it, I wish I had that manifestation power. That would be so cool. So for me, it's not a question if it's a mental construction or not. Yes, they are absolutely here. Without it unequivocally clear, yes, they are here. Yes, we are not alone. And yes, we're definitely not a little weird pocket in a huge universal structure where we're the only planet with life forms on it. Goes without saying. That's
sure.
Yeah.
And like I say, I haven't shared this publicly. Let's just say I've seen something in the sky twice that I couldn't explain, and I've talked to other people about it. And and at the same time, for me personally, I'm still open to the fact that that's the case, but it doesn't seem very likely, right? The possibilities of it, of this, even if we just consider the old spiritual teaching things, that there's something else beyond this life. It's just not. That's probably one of my least favorite theories at the moment is atheistic materialism, or just being that's it, that's all this dumb matter that happened by a completely random chance. That's the least one that I subscribe to now. I haven't completely wrote it off because I can't prove it inside and out without a doubt, but yeah.
So again, for those who are unfamiliar with some of my other material, the craft I saw in Australia was not just a little dot in the sky. I've seen plenty of these little moving dots in the sky, and we can always say it's a satellite or it's space debris or what's going on up there. We don't know these little dots. I don't really accredit them to be what we could call proofs of space or alien life or what have you, because it could be many things. So that's the uncertainty. I had a personal experience where I was looking at, I can't remember the constellation, but one of the stars, and similarly as there was a movie, oh dang it, I can't remember what it's called, with, I shouldn't allude to it because I completely forgot it. Anyways, one of the stars just grew bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it just grew smaller and smaller. So that was a very clear, either I had temporarily lost my mind or I was seeing something that wasn't there. But again, that was where I could have a questioning. But the experience itself. But in Australia, I was sitting in meditation, and I got, for those who see crafts, we have there's a weird air around us. The fabric of reality changes. Even my voice changed there. It changes you. It's kind of the molecules begin to vibrate in a different way. And you just know you just know to the bone, something out of the ordinary is now going to happen. Not something that just you look up and, it's there. When these are the phenomena that can be artificially induced via holographic overlay programs. It can be many different things. We know we have already got, when we talk about military projects, they have got a lot of technology we don't know of. A lot of things can be manifested without actually anything else than a holographic overlay. But when we talk about the real crafts, because they enter into our reality, they change the entire fabric of our reality when they do so. And they do it specifically for few people. They are targeting people for these visuals. And one of the good UFO movies I actually saw was Australian Skies. I watched it on Netflix years ago. It's been taken off, but there was the interviewer were talking to people who had these experiences, and they all talk about how they almost wake up knowing where to go, and then they get this molecular vibrational change in the air themselves. Everything is alluding to that moment. We kind of know now something is happening that's out of the ordinary, and in that you're already attentive. You get this whole kind of observe. It's like the whole fabric around you says, now you focus. And I was looking out and I saw through the clouds, huge, what you call a cumulus cloud is.
Cumulus
Thank
clouds,
you.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm struggling for these words is I know them in Danish, but.
I call them thunderheads sometimes too.
Yes, but they were completely white, huge mountains of clouds. And out of that came a round white sphere. And since the cloud was so big, the sphere it's like a mothership. It was not just a little sphere, it was a humongously big sphere. And it came out slowly, horizontally, in a pace that was not the size it had, would not have been possible. And it came out slowly out of the clouds, and the clouds departed very slowly around it, and it came so much out that I could see was this round sphere, completely unified, round white sphere. And I was just looking at it, and the moment it took for me to really, my mind going into this is actually a craft, to where I could speak to the other one that was in the apartment with me, the person was in another room, and say, hey, come and look at this. The moment I began thinking about that, then it retracted. And for me, it's always been this regret. Why didn't I just shut up and just observed and was just in that experience and had the patience to see what they actually wanted instead of trying to share it, because it was clearly for me. And since I wanted to share it, then they retracted just as slowly. And that moment was kind of lost for me. So in that one, I could say, this is not something my mind can make up.
And even these things on the inner realm, if detractors would say, and I think we mentioned this in the last one too, this is all the imagination. Well, how do you know it's the imagination? How does that work anyway? How do these experiences, where do they come from? Nothing is just created out of thin air for reasons. And some people might say, well, it's from other movies or this and that sources. Again, have to look at these sources that they would particularly come from. Where did those come from? So it's basically like tracing back to the first origin, right? And so these things have to be based on something somewhere. So until those questions are explained and known without a doubt, all these different processes, it just seems irrational for me not to consider that this is a possibility, right? Until all those other questions can be known and they can artificially produce these things, then in the minds and prove without a doubt that's what they did. And even then, just because we'll look at crystals, right? They can make artificial quartz crystals in the lab, but that doesn't mean that there are no real quartz crystals out there, right? Just because they can artificially create them. So it is a interesting, huge thing all around. But I think what Randy's point earlier was that's important is like, how do we take this information and these experiences and things and apply them to our lives and use it to make choices and what do we want to do with it? What's the point of this? And
yeah, as a psychotherapist as well, when we go into this, when we work with current life issues, as in, of course, if it's not prevailingly out there, making our life complicated. In a way, all depending on which type of psychology you're working with. But for me, at least after having worked with clients for many, many years, is unless it's making a lot of noise, there's no really need to poke your hand into the wound unless it makes noises. So some people are there's a reason why I'm talking about this. For some people, they are coping very well, even though that they have gone through some pretty severe childhood trauma. They have created a construction around themselves, which is called defense mechanisms, but they have created this persona that makes them functional in the world. And if we crack that persona down, then their entire personality matrix will fall apart and they will be dysfunctional. They will not be operational inside this world. So there's no point in going and cracking that one down. But if the cracks are already there, if the whole personality matrix is already beginning to dissolve, yes, absolutely. Then as a therapist, we go in, then we work with it. We reconstruct the personality structure. We go in and then we take the whole thing because it's there. It's presenting itself. It has become a problem. It gets in the way of what we call a decent type of life. And the reason why I'm talking about this is that when we talk about the alien agenda, if it has presented itself as it does with psychological issues, and it begins to poke holes in our world perception and begins to become a problem for us, then we can't deny it anymore. We can't say, it's not there. I don't want to see blah, 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 do the three monkeys. We have to address it. We have to look at it. And with all, when we talk about human history, whether it's true or not, that's not my point here. We're just doing normal generic understanding of this is human history. Over the course of human history, whatever it is, because it's always people's accounts of something that has happened and their interpretation of it. But if we go with that, some of it might be true, might not be, but over the course of history, we have seen that changes within different groups, different populations, always begins with pioneers. It always begins with few that go in and say, okay, my perception of reality and life has now so different from what others have that I need to investigate this. I need to figure out what this is. And those of us who are going into the alien agenda, we are the ones that are now pioneering on this. And this is to those I'm talking. I'm not talking about Mr. and Mrs. Hanson down the street that are comfortably within the base program and they're happy there. Let them be happy there. I would like to be happy there, but I have had different experiences and I need to investigate what they are, similar with the UFO researchers. We need to investigate what this is. And with everything that we're doing here, we need to take it to the next level. That those of us who are doing this, instead of trying to write it off as a mental projection or write it off as some kind of deception or delusional or some weird thing that the mind is doing, going in and say, okay, they are here. Take that one as a first step. We got a problem, people. And not try to write it off as the Pentagon report and all these kind of things, right?
And I would actually encourage those people who are convinced that this is a mental construction to go into the neuroscience and prove it without the shadow of a doubt that it is. And, how can we prove? To me, it's flabbergasting to think that somebody who's studying brain chemicals and putting dye in the brain and making images of it and putting different pictures together can actually say that's proof that this stuff isn't happening. To me, it's just not as simple as that. Or maybe I'm missing something here. But I don't know how it would be proved or disproved one way or the other. So this.
No, we could, with that kind of science, you can say, well, it's just a part of the brain that lights up and shows this is a mental process of the experience. So again, we need to be scientific around this and say, well, this table, we know when we do Descartes who was talking about the rose in the other room, when I turn my back, does it then cease to exist? And for me, that's just stop being so mental. Get your foot on the ground. The table is in front of you. Even if you leave the room, it's still fucking there. Unless we're going to the complete matrix program, whatever. But what's the point of that? For me, that's just mental escapism. You're just trying to escape what is there by making mental construction as if it's a type of advanced denial. So for me, it's just, no, let's butt heads with the table is there. It hurts when I hit it and I can put a camera on it. We'll still say, well, the camera will then catch it and there will be there. And I'm just kind of, okay, could we get the feet on the ground again? Let's just, if we are to deal with this problem, if we go out in these spacey ideas of what is and what isn't, well, if people want to go down that path, go down that path. But most who have gone down that path, they end up being crazy.
Well, this is the common question I have about these non-dual teachings, when these people say that, oh, it's just an illusion, everything's an illusion. Well, again, I said this time and time again, go run into that tree at full speed and tell me it's an illusion, right? I kind of like the analogy of it's a dreamlike nature, right? And so I'm not talking about kind of ultimate materiality, ultimate mentality here. It's just like, just this everyday occurrence that everybody's experienced. Everybody's woken up from a dream and realized, oh, I was just dreaming. Okay, that's not how it is, but it seems so real at the time. Just like there's parallels in our waking life where once we realize something is actually not the way we had perceived it to be before, right? So
but that's where I like to go into a different type of science, because for me the physical reality is physical because we're operating on the same frequency level. And people will say, well, that's vibrational level. And again, I've kind of similar words, but they work in different ways. So as long as we are on that frequency level, whatever we're encountering will be physical. If we go up to a higher oscillation, find that more accurate, then we will discover that what we perceive to be matter forms are actually just empty space, which we know. So yes, nothing doesn't really exist. But as long as we're on that vibrational level or that oscillation, then it is damn real and we need to address it.
Yeah, if we're riding the bus or riding the train, you start going and shouting people, this is all an illusion, this train doesn't exist, you people are so asleep, what are you doing? Or, it just doesn't, I don't think it's going to be it's not going to be a very good time for everybody.
We might be totally wrong. We're the delusional. But okay, so let's work in each in our own bubble of delusional states. Yeah. So it all comes down to, in this weird discussion, then it comes down to, okay, find your peers of delusions, right? Find the ones you want to experience reality with, which is also part of it. So for me, again, it comes down to, after having all of these discussions over the course of time, with myself, what to do and what not to do. For instance, when I was younger, I was part of a peace movement and vegetarianism and all these things. And back then that was kind of completely outlandish. And today we have plant-based food as a completely normal thing. So I go with because sometimes that's a psychological comfort zone as well. If we are to investigate reality, if we are to deal with what's there, we need to accept that for us in this moment, in this time, in this situation, this is real. So how do I deal with it? What are my, that's the foot in the ground, as in, yes, others might say it's not real. Others might say this is different. Others might say that's what it is. That's relative reality perception. And that's a fact as well we can put into the equation and say, yes, everybody has their own experience. Everybody has their own perception of what they're experiencing. And everybody has their own concepts of truth and what it is and what it isn't. They will explain the table is this from different levels of perception. But the point of this is that we cannot get entrapped in all of these mental constructions, because that's, for me, that's a path of, it's an endless path of rabbit holes.
It is. And this is, to me, investigating the nature of reality. And thought is only just one little aspect of it. So I guess we already talked about, well, how does this apply, or how can we use this to further our own lives here and now? But I guess if people are interested in going about this maybe more systematically or investigating these things for themselves, so what kind of advice would we give people, like especially the priority of kind of where to start? And then once there's some kind of foundation level, like what's important right now to get into, to investigate, and then overall, you know what I mean? So sometimes there's these time windows where it makes sense to focus on certain things during this time period, but then there's other things, I'm oversimplifying it here, but then there's things that are just in the overall alien agenda, quote unquote, kind of thing to investigate and look into. What's kind of the priorities here for folks, who would say? Yeah.
So for me, if we kind of go with people wants to go into the alien agenda, there are two different levels on this one. There are ones that have had the experience, the ones that haven't had the experience. And that has to be addressed as well. Those who haven't had the experience, but just do it out of curiosity, go on the internet. Look it up. There are so much information out there. There's been so many good people having done so much information on so many levels. And I would recommend go back in the 80s and the 90s and 2000, because quite a lot of the stuff that's up now is just a repeat of that. It's just a rebranding. It's just taking the same good old story and putting a little bit of different words into it. But the essence of it ends up being the same as it has been, as it was addressed 30 years ago. So for me, what is the interesting thing is those of us who have had experiences, how do we go around this psychologically? How do we go around this as a narrative that is part of our self-conceptualization, as a part of, I know these are a lot of fancy words, but it is going in and say, okay, I've had this experience that's out of the ordinary. This is an extraordinary experience. Do I deny it, or do I go into it? Do I go run around in my living room with my arms above my head going into panic? How do I address it? How does it affect me psychologically? And go there first, as in do the self-investigation, say, how do I respond to the fact that there are aliens there that have been here all along? They are not my space brothers. They are not here to progress humanity into a higher state of hybridization. People can get my subtle notion of that one. Absolutely, that's so illegal as it can be, because there's no point in hybrids. There's no point in being half gray, half human. That would make no sense whatsoever. But when we look at the human civilization as a planetary civilization, what do we need to require or create or generate or progress into to understand that we are, as much as any other species, in this huge realm of universal structures that have many different vibrational states? How do we get ourselves into that level of perception that lets us work with that level of reality as well? What does it take to get us there? What are the sciences that we must develop? What are the psychological structures we must work into? What are the deeper implications of not just people are saying, oh, it's religious, or it will scatter people's religious belief systems, that then there is no God, or we make God into a huge alien or whatever. But there for me, as well as being part of Danish culture and a psychotherapist as well, then we must deconstruct these religious belief systems, not doing as the Vatican that have come up with, then we incorporate it in the existing religion. For me, it's just more like kind of taking the religion off the table and say, yeah, that was made 3,000 years ago. Perhaps it's about time we as a humanity begin to look into different ways of perceiving ourselves. And perhaps the notion of, if we could say, what are they doing here aside from all of the other projects, we could say one of the things that's definitely on the table is that those of us who have perception of these things, our worldview is being scattered, and we need to address that psychologically, emotionally, and mentally, but also scientifically, as well as conceptual, in the whole concepts of things of what is reality, what are we in this reality, and what do we need to develop to get to the point where we understand these dynamics, not just the nuts and bolts of the crafts and how they are operational and what they can do with these new technologies, but just as much our psychological process.
I want to hone in here on what you just said here really brief, or recently, is it scatters our worldview. Could you go into more of what you mean by that? What's going on with that? Because that seems like a very hefty issue, especially in this mode of media that we're in here. You know, just the very nature that we're recording this. And I would think the media would play into this too, because the media is significantly influential into shaping people's worldviews, as well as institutions too, learning. So this is an informational thing. The internet as a whole goes into our worldview. The medium of our art, it plays too. But yeah.
Okay, so it's good you bring it up, because as an existential psychotherapist, for me it's completely, the things get scattered, you put it back together, you create, you progress via crisis. That's my basic understanding of life and what life is, that you have different opportunities in life, and the way you view these opportunities will either lead to progression or it will lead to depression. You choose yourself what you're dealing with. Not that it's easy peasy. Some of these processes are pretty scattering in the manner that, all depending on the experience we have had or the amount of experiences. If people just have one little thing out, seeing a little dot in the sky, and they for a moment in time get this little glimpse that it might be something different, they quickly close it down and do not go in further, investigate, just close it down and forget it, and then they move on business as usual. So that's not particularly scattering. But I would say, not that it was scattering for me to see that craft in Australia. For me, it was actually kind of finally what took you so long, because I've been working with telepathically with different groups since 2007, right? So that was kind of, why is there not more visual? For me, the question is actually, with the work I've been doing, why is there not more crafts in the sky? Why is it not more visible? Why is it not more out there in our faces? That's actually the process for me, is to ask that foundational question, as in kind of not longing and yearning. I'm not as in Independence Day when they run up on the roof with the signs, "Welcome aliens." That's not the case.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm wondering now about just we talked a little bit about the visible light spectrum and stuff like that. Well, yeah, I don't know how all this stuff plays out, but I would imagine that. But remember, I mentioned there's a place called ESETI Ranch where they have viewings, and from what I understand, from what's been told in the videos on their YouTube channel, with the right equipment, right, that they can see these, but it's through night vision goggles. And of course they do the things online to say, oh, no, that's the space station or that's a satellite, but this doesn't show up on any of our systems or whatever. And so that they consider that. But now that's one aspect of it, you know, so I just don't know enough about how it works with the visible light spectrum and the mind state, or the state of consciousness that needs to match up with that, nor the incoming phenomena either, what has to happen on their end for these things to meet, and whether or not there's what are the circumstances and surrounding environment that would be conducive or not conducive, the conditions for these things to happen. So all that stuff would have to come in for me to actually be able to talk more about that. Basically, to summarize, I don't know.
Yeah, so that might or might not be. But for me here, if we kind of say, we got two boxes here. We got the psychological one, we got the scientific one. And again, this is where we need to expand our awareness into understanding which box are we working within. So we have this, what does it do to me psychologically? And then we have the nuts and bolts of the sciences. And that's where when we talk about the aliens that are here and the different experiences I've had and all the things I have gone through understanding code systems and the original DNA and the original genetics and consciousness potentials and the mechanics of our universe, that one of the things that I can say that's a trap for most humans that look into that is that they are trying to use frequency technology, frequency sciences, normal general sciences to understand alien technology that runs on holographic code systems within density vibrational fields of radiation that works in a completely different way. So that's the first answer to my own question. Why is there not more predominantly visible here? Because it takes, as I said, the molecular state, the entire state fabric of reality must be changed for that occurrence to happen.
Especially the external vision too.
No, just the fabric of reality to manifest inside this reality. Whether you see it or not, that's depending on your genetics. So that's for me it's not, the purpose is not for everybody to see that, because I know not everybody can see that, because it's a completely different energetic visualization or a different perception of reality. Your neural network has to be adapted. That's why when we talk about the Australian skies and those of us who have this, we are being modified already via a dream state before we wake up, so we can perceive when they do make the encounter. And Dolores Cannon talks about this as well with, I can't remember which talk. I'm sorry about that, Dolores, but she had put out so much information. She did put out so much information. But she talks about how this person was in his or her car, and they had this huge beam of light, almost like the encounter of Third Degree, right? And it was just literally beaming the entire craft up from the highway. And the person then asked the Greys, well, why didn't anybody else see it? And they said, because it was tailored for you, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was engineered, tailored, manifested, created that way, especially for you. Nobody else saw it. So that's one of the key words here, is that we are dealing with species that have a technology that is reality altering. So if we're trying to conceptualize it within our stupid little base program technology, we will fall short every single time. So the first step, as we also know throughout the course of history, from shamans, medicine women, and men, and what have you, and when we talk about this passport to cosmos of Michael, help me there, his name.
Is it Michael Newton?
No.
That's another one. Yeah.
The psychologist that made this. Sorry, I'm so sorry, I forgot the name.
Passport of the Cosmos.
Yes,
you can search by the title.
That's the book. We'll put the right name below it. Sorry about that. This is because it's a different part of my brain, so I forgot it right now. It will come up later. Where we're talking about this understanding of that the aliens have been here. There are traces of it. We know that with the ancient alien history. They are in paintings, they are in cave paintings. They have been here all along, all depending on which group we are talking about. And there have been different accounts of it. There have been different ways of conceptualizing it, different ways of explaining this. So there have always been groups within humanity, and that's been talked about when we talk about the lineages. And some of the ones that were traded off for the newcomers within the military projects, they were traded off to be part of the hybrid projects because they already had the genetic composition that allowed for the visual contact, that allowed for the occurrences or the ability to be pulled in, the ability to be abducted, to be altered genetically to come on board these crafts. So that's another thing we need to put in as well when we talk about why is not everybody working on this, because it's not for all, not that it's an elitist thing, but it is a genetic thing.
And so people might be saying, well, I want my genetics altered. How do I do that without having someone else do it? Is there something I can do to get my genetics altered so I can be in a state so where I can make contact? But and I also want to throw something out here too, is that we've kind of talked about the scientific box. Now the psychological box, if I were to maybe answer my question on one angle, the psychological part of this is very important, because if someone's not prepared to deal with this psychologically, of course, it's probably not going to happen anyway, right? Yeah. And then we have the other psychological response of, oh yeah, I see this stuff. I've seen this stuff before, but then, because of other circumstances in their lives, they're into other things that are interesting too. They're not putting as much time on this too. So they're not prioritizing looking and investigating it as deeply as some are too. So, should we encourage those folks to spend some extra time looking into this, the ones that have had experiences, and say, oh yeah, that's it's no big deal. That happens, that happens and this and that, but they're not going with it. They're not looking deeper into it that they could if they wanted to, because of whatever reasons. Yeah.
So again, I'll end up in having gone through all of these. What can I do? What should I do?
Sure.
What is mine to do? For me, as a psychotherapist, I'm very grateful I actually have that angle on it, because then I've been working with so many different people. For instance, as in kind of, not everybody has been unfortunate in their lives and had succumbed to sexual abuse. So working with these people, you have to work with this in a specific way, because there's a trauma that's involved in it. And that's very, very similar to some of the abductions. We're talking the same degree of trauma, whether it's remembered or not. It's the same dynamic. And I would say in my perception of things, that's exactly what some of these newer groups have played. Not that they have taken people who already had sexual abuse, but they have played on the same denial mechanism by taking these humans into an altered state, and then when they're on board craft, they are in an altered state of mind and perception, and then put them back into the physical reality, and then they have not wiped them, but because it's in a different level of the neural network, people don't recall it. They have to regress or go under hypnosis to recall it, but they have molecular memory of it, and it's just a matter of time before that begins to surface. And that's some of the things I'm working with. Not that I'm taking that angle right now, but again, the questions in the process, the psychological process, is that we need to look at things and then make up our mind whether or not it's something we want to work with. And for me, this whole alien abduction and all the things that are involved, similarly as with sexual abuse, that's, even though I am skilled for it, I'm trained for it, I have a huge part of my education is part of it, and I know exactly how all of these things are. This is just a matter where I can feel that would burn me out too quickly. It affects me emotionally too much, these hardcore levels, similar with people that have been brought in for the breeder programs. It affects me too much. So that's a choice I've made, saying, well, even though I know I might be skilled at working with it, I've chosen not to, because I can just feel the sadness in me that you can almost hear it in my voice, that I can't deal with that angle. So for me, this is also going in and say, well, then there are other angles I can work with, which I find more conducive for my personal story, what I remember, my capacities, what I can work with. Just because it's there doesn't mean that we have to choose to work with it. So it again comes into, what are you ready for? That's a psychological process. You can't just chew on everything you want to chew on. Sometimes you have to work with what you are capable of working with, and what is prudent for you to work with, and what level of trauma, stress, and crisis you can deal with. And even though I can deal with a lot of trauma and stress because of all the things I have gone through, I still choose what I want to look into, what I don't want to look into. And I think that's important for people to respect their limitations. And if they do have that, then slowly broaden them. Don't plunge yourself into the deep end. Sometimes we are pushed there. If we deny our original capacities, we are thrown into the deep end of the pool, or the dark night of the soul, because then we get a kick in the butt. Now you really need to wake up. So once you're asking me, Josh, this kind of, can we give some kind of recipe? No. There is no recipe. It depends on where we are on the scale of these experiences, where we are on the scale of our own psychological developmental processes. It depends on how ready we are for the deeper levels of reality. It depends on if we can cope with these different levels of reality. If we are strong enough psychologically, there are some of us that have this enormously strong psychological capacities to deal with a lot of stuff. And there are others that are more vulnerable.
And then once that foundation's laid, it's how interested in this are you? And then what is one, and what angle ought to be explored with my own unique talents and abilities, I'd imagine too.
So for me, being part of that group that has that strong psychological structure, then I feel it's part of my life statement or mission, or not that I want to put myself up or elevate or whatever. I feel it's a kind of responsibility for the broader context of humanity, that because I am in that end and are capable, then I am forced to ask all of these very difficult questions and look into all of these difficult questions. To not just to expand my awareness, but also to try and say, okay, how many solutions can I then come up with? But at the same time, once that is done for the pioneers and we go into that mindset, well, I've looked at it, I've dealt with it in my own relative reality, then it must be implemented into the joint field of reality. And that's where the others come in. That's where we can say, okay, how do we then convey that to others? So for me, when you ask, how would I see a strategy for people working with this? Well, first step would be that those who actually have the hardcore experiences, instead of working with it individually, which we have to be consolidated in our experiences, be cool with it, be balanced. That's a psychological process. We have to have dealt with the trauma of it. We have to have cried and moaned and done moaned and all the things, and moaning and moaning and bitching about it and all of this, the psychological, as if we have gone through a huge trauma, whether it's trauma of war or it's trauma of childhood or whatever it is, we need to have dealt with it psychologically first. Then we can meet up, and then we will begin to discuss, okay, we have had these compare experiences, not just on YouTube or the internet, but as real people meeting up, not from the angle of, as we know with Luis Alessandro and his group, as a kind of, is this a national threat? That's part of it, but it's also a human existential question that needs to be addressed. It is, what are they actually working with? What are the technologies here? What have we experienced? How can we go into these technologies? How can we understand these technologies? What we have experienced? What is this actually? Not just from the craft in the sky or the secret military projects, but from the ones that's been pulled in, because they're actually the ones that have the deepest knowledge of what they have experienced. They've been on board crafts.
And how like or unlike are they from me? You know, what do they understand? What don't they understand? Where are the communication similarities and differences too? You know, what can they teach me? What can I teach them?
Yeah,
and,
well, that's where I'm just kind of completely, for me, those two groups who've done that, the whole MO of what they've been doing here is completely illegal. So I'm not interested in anything.
How do I handle that? How do I respond to that? What can I do? What's good for me to do? What's probably against my best interest for me not to do or not to do? And also, you know, people, I guess maybe that are just starting this out, some people might think, well, you know, what does it matter what my voice says or what I think about this or whatever? It's just one little speck in the universe, or, you know, putting out a video. What good is that going to do? Or speaking my mind or talking to someone or just asking a question. So, you know, that could be right. It could have absolutely no impact whatsoever. But if you don't do it, then it might not, you won't know either way. So, and for better or worse, this anonymous nature of the internet, you know, that's why I stress ethics and good conduct, or not necessarily good, but skillful conduct, because it is so easy for people just to go and say anything they want anywhere anonymously. So I think that can be a very valuable tool for people who are too shy to actually get involved or say anything, to say things anonymously. At the same time, it has to be done skillfully and ethically, you know, not only for one's own welfare and happiness, but others too. So yeah, use discernment and caution.
So, and to make that very clear, Josh and I are talking about the two ends of the scale here, as in kind of the what we could say the beginner's level, and then the fully, and I want to go for the fully.
Sure, you should.
But the point is that I've also experienced that once when I try to do that, it gets stopped every time. And I think that's important to be put in as well, that whoever's here, whatever group they are, they really don't want us to team up and join these experiences and create that collective field where this becomes part of our reality. For me, that everything they're doing here, all the groups, whether it's the ancient ones or the new ones or whoever's here, they are okay with having quote unquote ambassadors. They're okay with having little voices here and there. But the moment we begin to team up and go into the power of the many, that's where we get our butts kicked.
And it seems like it comes to this time and time again. We see the importance of this, the power of a kind of a group container, a group field. And so, yes, it alerts, it alerts attention, to say the least. And once it even gets possible, how do we deal with that? But before it even gets possible, usually it gets sabotaged from within, or certain things are set up or influenced so where it just takes itself apart. And then they're just like, well, see, you guys can't even get along amongst each other. So that's why we have the authority to do what we're doing to you, because you just like little kids can't get along fighting over the same toy kind of thing. Right. But let's say we do get to the point where they are responsible, then can imagine, well, then they have to really be on the game of diplomatically, and if that doesn't work, other ways, and so it's things to consider. But from what I gather, it's not possible right now. But how do we go from completely writing the whole thing off because it's so challenging to what are the baby steps towards this?
Yes. So that begins with the individual work, right? We have to, the first of many for the high school of the many, someone has to begin, someone has to get the ball rolling. And yes, there are also what we call the white hats amongst the groups, but they are also very, because I've been in so many different types of levels of contact. Some of them are in this whole kind of, we want to reveal something, but not all of it, because we want to keep this a secret for whatever reason that is. We also have the issues with the different factions that are here that are fighting amongst each other. So that's why they have to keep this a secret, because once you work with what we kind of call holographic knowledge and holographic templates that are behind all manifestation, it's like revealing the archetype of it, or the architecture of it. And you don't do that. You don't do that to one who doesn't know how to administer that level of information, because you have other interception technologies that go in and scan you and completely offload everything you have in your mind and then load it onto their system. Then they will have access to the other groups and their technologies. So that's where I mean that when we address these things, we need to first and foremost change our way we perceive things and go out of a little bubble here and say, no, the universe is not just uniformly based upon frequency energies. There are other layers to it, not just dimensions of it, but actual different types of energy settings that creates and demands a different scientific approach. Then we have the whole psychological readiness to do so. We are in a scale where people are not ready to people that have had so many experiences, they need to deal with it. Then we have the trauma of it that needs to be dealt with. So we kind of go in and work with that as well, so people get healed by their experiences. Then we have the existential, as in this is poking hole to my belief system, which isn't the easy end for me. But for some, that's challenging because they're not used to work with psychological challenges. So they go into denial because they don't. And for me, that's the group will just say, well, let's protect them. And these are the ones we invite to the party at the last ones, because they're not ready yet at all. So it's all about getting into that readiness. I know others have been talking about that as well, but the last 5 years, everything's kind of been shut down. So we're starting all over again, say, okay, we got completely thrown off because of the last 5 years. So how do we get back on track with what we actually begun with? And for me, that's all of you out there who've been doing this for years and years and years. I know you as well as I have felt this kind of disheartening, what's the whole point? Or because the last 5 years and our whole world was shut down, as in going and say, okay, what did we do before 2018 and what are we doing now? Because in 1817 we had the connection to the dark galactic core, and that's now off the table. We've got new incoming groups that are working differently. So we need to upgrade as well. So for me, when you ask me, Josh, what should people do? I'm alluding, or I'm trying to get to the people that have already done this already, that are schooled in this, that have done this as part of their life. They have already, but felt a little bit, it leads to nothing. It is not, yes, I get this huge expansion of my own awareness, but how do I actually put it out there? How do, not just as information anymore, because there's plenty of information. What's the next step? people? What's the next step of implementation of this? Not to invite in the groups by our implementation processes, not to invite in the factions or the Greys or whoever, because we don't want them here. So all depending on, again, the standpoint, what is people's standpoint? Do they want them here? Do they not want them here? And that goes with, for me, the reason why I don't want them here, although I could say that's very, very exciting, but all the experiences I have had, and you say, well, Rand, it's because you're a warrior, it's because you have had that old streak battling with them in other systems, and then you're battling with them now, or you're battling with the memories of them, and that's your perception, you have to change that. And then we have the other ones that go into completely loving kindness. Oh yeah, we need to champion, what do you call it? Champion.
Good kumbaya.
Yes, exactly.
Join hands and sing kumbaya.
Yes, exactly. And each one is equally unbalanced. So point being of all of this is there are no answers, there are processes. And each one have to be ready to do these processes. But it's the next step of human psychology, people. That's where I want to push this. It's the next step of human psychology. We're not alone in this universe. We have a joint history with these races. It's not out of the blue. You are so much more than you think you are. You used to be part of solar system civilizations. We have been downsized due to the timeline event. We are in what we call a restoration zone. We are in what's called a quarantine. How do we get out of that? And all of these groups that are coming in because we are not living up to our potentials in this process of getting this universal structure back into its original dynamics. And that's why we are.
It makes me wonder about, the whole process more so important than the end goal, because we've seen and heard time and time again, certain very powerful secretive groups, they don't reveal their agenda. So when they do to the wrong people, then people will know what they want and then can come in and counteract their agendas if it's interfering with theirs. So I'm not advocating secrecy. It's nor am I advocating not setting goals. It's like where is the sweet spot amongst that, but whatever it is or isn't, to me, the whole process of just engaging all of this is one of the most important things to begin with anyway. So, but again, processes don't work if that's all it is. It's just some kind of random chaotic process that just kind of doesn't have any kind of direction either. So to me, it seems like a balance between all that.
Yeah. So for me, at the end of the day, it all comes into the original progression dynamics of all civilizations in whatever universal structure you're in. We live to progress. We do not live to have status quo. We do not, existence in itself, life in itself is pointless unless there is a progression. That's just complete basic for me. Sure. It's not basic for others, but it's basic for me. And that's why I approach these things as looking into things, whatever comes my way, what's in the way, why am I not engaging in this, what's the progression, what's the depression or the regression of it, what the dynamics of transforming energy, transforming consciousness, whatever that means. And these are some pretty difficult processes we'll have to go into when we do that. And unless that readiness is there, then for me, it will quickly end into an end goal as a strategy or an end goal. This is just, I want that answer and nothing else, because then I might add it to my comfort zone, but I'm not in this continued process of progression. I'm not in this continued process of expansion. So whatever topic we're working with, whether it's aliens or factions or humans or animals or plants or planet itself or whatever it is, all of these are just different levels of expansion potentials. But it's not about getting the expanded, enlightened power, psychic power or whatever, so we can communicate with aliens or whatever. It is just as much a self-reflection of, we go to the soul level and this go into our true nature or whatever that is. So there's so much more to it. It's not just spirituality. It's the foundation of existence we're actually talking about.
We haven't even got into consciousness development, expansion, sciences either, or life force. Yeah. And so maybe that would be for another time or maybe not. But yeah. So is there anything else you want to leave folks with around this topic other than, well, I wanted to say, again, a reminder, if anybody wants to write in, is curious about what topics or have specific questions, the comments will be open at least for a time period on my channel with this. So Randy, what would you like to?
people that are out there saying, how do I begin this? And I would say, for those who have not begun their own psychological journey, understanding who and what they are, begin there. Because when we go into awakening processes or when we go into deep spirituality processes, there will be these very, very difficult crises that will come our way. And if we're not psychologically ready to deal with that, if we haven't got the toolkit to do that, then it will be a bit of a bumpy road, let's put it that way. And we have had this road of enlightenment or remembering who we are or dealing with the expanded universal structure as consciousness and energy has had over the course of time. That path is littered with people that have not had the psychological foundation in order. And I don't want that for anyone. So that's why I always recommend begin with psychological foundation. The next step is mindfulness, practice of mindfulness and practice of meditation. And then practice of how to learn to do energy work, as in self-nurturing, self-caring, learning the understanding how to constantly balance ourselves back into our heart field and get that true compassion towards ourselves first. Patience, compassion, self-acceptance, seeing things as they are with all of our dirty laundry, whatever that is, not to be in denial of who and what we are. Because once we can see who and what we are, and I have learned to be in balance with that, whatever that is, good or ill, because we all have different traits of trauma and traits of things that are difficult to handle, but being balanced with that, then we will be more mature and ready to deal with the difficulties of an expanded universe. So even though many people are looking into the expanded universe first, and they have a lot of very interesting experiences, but if they want the really deep journey of complete expansion between who they are and the world they're part of, it begins with ourselves. And the Greeks told us that already. Know thyself. Clean up your own mess first. Clean up your own house. Be rooted in your own foundation. Don't begin to build the roof unless you have the foundation in order. The foundation must always be in order for all this work, whatever it is, whatever level it is on.
And keep coming back and testing your foundation from time to time, too.
Yes, it has a tendency to rot away. And don't build on sand. Please build on some really good foundation so your house will remain. And from that, you can continue to build the different layers and tiers of the house. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you all for listening in, and that'll do it for this video.